Thanks for tuning in to our partner webinar brought to you by the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. This webinar is part of our NANP's partnership program, bringing you the latest information, education, products, and services from the holistic nutrition and wellness space. These webinars are recorded from a live event with a Q&A session for the attending audience. We hope you find this information useful and consider including our partners and their offerings in your life.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Clinical Success with Foundational and Targeted Supplement Strategies with U.S. Enzymes, featuring Roland Pankowick. I am your host, Tiffany Perry, Development Specialist for the NANP. Just as a reminder, these webinars are recorded and will be sent out later this week. Before we begin, I want to share an important notice for all participants. This meeting, along with all materials presented today, including slides, audio, visual, and chat content, is protected intellectual property of the hosting organization, the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. Recording, screen capturing, rebroadcasting, transcribing, or otherwise using any portion of this presentation is strictly prohibited without prior written permission. This includes the use of third-party platforms such as Webinar TV and AI chatbots, AI note-taking tools, or any other artificial intelligence technologies. Unauthorized use of this content may result in immediate removal from the meeting and may subject the offending party to legal action. By remaining in this session, you acknowledge and agree to these terms. Thank you for your cooperation, and we appreciate and we respect everything you do to join us here today. Roland is a health educator, a practitioner trainer, and host of Following Your Gut podcast with a background in fitness, holistic nutrition, and functional assessment. He specializes in translating complex science into practical strategies for digestive health, microbiome balance, and overall wellness. Roland collaborates with leading supplement innovators to help practitioners and individuals achieve measurable health improvements through critical thinking, personalized care, and evidence-based approaches. And Roland is awesome because he wants to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So if you have some questions that you would like to ask as we're going along, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box and I'll read them along as we go. Thank you so much for joining us today, Roland.
Thank you for the wonderful intro, Tiffany. And yes, guys, I know what it's like to be on the other end of a 1 hour long webinar, just listening to someone deliver a monologue. If I had my way, this would be in person, but maybe at some point we can look at doing that. But yes, if you do have some questions, please do pop them in. And I want to thank you for attending today. I'm very excited to share with you something that really kind of was created out of, I don't want to call it fully by accident, but it was something that evolved in my way of trying to find solution for questions we were often getting. So this master philosophy is something I want to share with you, and I'm really happy to be here with the NANP because years ago when I was in nutrition school, I think it was about 12, 14 years ago, I was made aware of the organization, and it was something that I was very much interested in becoming part of. I actually went away from nutrition, studying some other aspects of healthcare and health practice, but I love how things come full circle. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you guys the inner details of the master philosophy, but I first want to introduce who we are and who I am representing, because I've been with U.S. Enzymes and Master Supplements for about 6 years. I've been very grateful in their opportunity to trust me as being their lead educator and clinical consultant. And if you are not familiar with the company, it's actually a family of brands. So the two lead birds, if you will, in the flying V are U.S. Enzymes and Master Supplements. And we also partner with another great company called Tomorrow's Nutrition Pro, which is a subsidiary of a Japanese company called Tire Corporation. And what I really love about them is in Japan, they have such a high standard of quality for natural health supplements, and they offer us the opportunity to have some of the best quality ingredients in the marketplace. So the fundamental thing about what makes us different is we specialize in enzymes and probiotics. And in my webinars, I often talk about protocol creation, how to use products. And if you do any kind of bioenergetic testing, muscle testing, I've heard from so many different practitioners that in that world, our products are either a yes or a no. Either they work with someone incredibly well or they don't. From a functional scientific perspective, if that is more your world, I'm hoping to really share some unique, innovative technology with you because our background has a lot of things that we offer in the supplement world that many people have just simply never heard of before. enzymes and probiotics are the thing that we do best. It's really what we do most, other than having a few nutritional products. And I think the probiotic world is very well represented in North America. I think the world of enzymes is underrepresented because most people think simply digestive enzymes when they hear the word enzyme. Our specialty in that world is systemic proteolytic enzymes, which are an incredible, incredible tool. Hopefully, I'll get some time to explain some today with questions. So, a little background about the company. As I said, we are a family of brands, and US Enzymes and Master Supplements, which is our consumer subsidiary. Those are the two leaders, so to speak. And Master Supplements was actually founded in 2003. And the founder, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, he passed about a year and a half ago, was an incredible microbiologist. He actually got his start in the world of agriculture and cheese making. So, some could say it's an homage du fromage. And that's the only joke I'm going to drop today. I promise you, I'm not a stand up comedian. The whole idea behind creating the product Theralac was he wanted to figure out how to make the best possible probiotic that did a few things. How do you get a probiotic into the system? Most people will say certain species of probiotic bacteria are fragile, which is true, which is why lactobacillus and bifidobacteria supplements typically don't work. If you don't protect them, that's also true. So once you make sure that you can get them in, you want to make sure that you can wake them up. And that's another specific technology that we use. And the one thing that we do with all of our probiotics, because we actually have a probiotic for each area of the digestive system, we have one targeted to the small and the large intestine. We have one that covers the systemic aspects of supporting the immune function through the gut. And we also have one that promotes microbial diversity. We designate the strains. And why strain designated probiotics are important is it's the same level of consideration or thoughtfulness that you would give to understanding someone's identity. You guys don't know me, but my name is Roland. I live in the US. I'm a health practitioner. That gives you information about me to understand who I am more so. When you strain designate a probiotic, you understand what that probiotic bacteria does, what family it belongs to, what functionalities it has, and why that's useful is you may or may not want a certain strain given someone's situation or clinical history. If someone has an autoimmune condition and you have a probiotic that raises inflammatory cytokines, you might not want to use that one. But if you have someone who has a serious yeast fungal problem, you might want to use that. So that's some of the specific details and the deeper science that we go into. Our patented technologies is what's called our deep delivery system. I promise you the capsule is not purple. This is just for effect so you can understand what this thing is. So as I mentioned before, probiotic bacteria are fragile, and the pH of the stomach at times gets as low as 2 to 3, which is a very, very acidic environment. Bacteria, for the most part, are not meant to survive in the stomach other than a few select strains. So what our late founder figured out was that you can create a protective coating around a probiotic using something called sodium alginate. And what sodium alginate essentially becomes is a life raft that when the pH drops, it converts into something called alginic acid. It allows the probiotics to get through the harsh conditions of the stomach into the part of the small intestine where most of the bacteria are residing, but we really want to get things to the colon where the vast majority of bacteria in the microbiome live. And this is a pH dependent delivery system that when the pH rises back to a more neutral 6 to 7, as it does in the small and the large intestine, it simply converts back to sodium alginate and dissolves and disperses the probiotic bacteria where we want them to go. The second aspect is making sure that once you've delivered probiotic bacteria, which arrive in a kind of suspended animation state, they're freeze dried, you want to ensure that you've sent them on their little journey with food. And this is where our other thing, patented thing, lactostim comes in. Lactostim is essentially a combination of oleic acid and sunflower lecithin. What most companies use is something called polysorbate 80. A lot of people in the health world do not like that, although it does help to increase the speed of replication of bacteria. So adding lactostim to the probiotic mixture after they're delivered, this gives them something to essentially speed up their rehydration and to maximize the ability for them to adhere and colonize so the probiotics can actually go to work in the small and large intestine to do the work that you want them to do. So that's a little bit about our unique background. And the thing that I most have to deal with in the company is figuring out how do I educate to a vast majority of health professionals? Because this is a list of just some of our accredited professionals that have accounts with us. I'm sure I'm missing a few. And what I love about this industry is there are so many different perspectives that there is no one way to do anything. How a functional medicine practitioner will address a client will be different from, say, a functional neurologist, or a chiropractor who's practicing functional medicine, or a dietitian or a nutritionist. My job is to try to translate what the products do and how they do their things so you can absorb them and utilize them with your own individual approach. And I think that's what's so wonderful because your approach is your magic. When it comes to the ability to help a client, it's really about connecting with that person, how you can problem solve, and then how you can understand creating a solution that's viable to be executed by the client. Because I always say the most well thought out protocol not executed is essentially a useless piece of information. And being a clinician nowadays, I myself am one, it's challenging because there is an incredible amount of information available. And I try to keep up on my reading as much as possible. And even I can't keep up with the amount of information that's inundating us, both from a research perspective, but also on social media. And everyone wants things in these short little snippets. It's about 10 seconds of attention to grasp me, and then I'm moving on. The reality is, clinical health isn't something that you can distill down to a soundbite. And the reason that the master philosophy was created is I wanted to figure out a way to guide people into understanding A, all of our product portfolio and where each product may sit in a veritable option or an opportunity for you as a clinician. And B, how do you start to layer things, combine and stack things to help focus on what your area of focus or specialty is? Or how do you use your knowledge base and your expertise to pick the right product for the person given the situation? And the hard part about that is, as a professional, you have to find this balance in being a clinician, which is not necessarily the same thing as being a business owner or a professional running a company. And I think this is a really good starting point for people because as you get to know the products and understand the philosophy behind things, you can start to play the association game with yourself or your clients based upon their symptoms, the results of the objective analysis that you do, specimen testing, biometric analysis, and the good old lost art of subjective analysis, listening to the person, analyzing their symptoms, building that interpersonal communication in the relationship with them so they feel comfortable to trust you and tell you what's going on.
And Roland, that kind of leads me to a question that I received here. What
Yes,
are the
please.
key clinical indicators that tell you a client's gut is not ready for more advanced interventions?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to try to answer this one fairly quickly. Clinical indicators from a digestive perspective would probably be any kind of stool testing where you have the elucidation of some inflammatory proteins or any kind of inflammatory aspects being present, something like a fecal lactoferrin or any kind of inflammatory presentation that might indicate that someone is in, say, an acute inflamed state. Or if you know that there's a pre-existing autoimmune-like condition, you might not want to perturb the immune system with a certain probiotic, whereas you might want to select another that is more downregulating. Very simply, to use this as an example, we have a probiotic called True Flora that has a couple different strains of lactobacilli with some bacillus, so a spore, in addition to enzymes that break down biofilms. And lactobacilli are really lactate producers. They drop the pH of the environment in the small intestine. And why that's useful is if someone has an alkaline intestine, that is a rife environment. The terrain is really good supporting yeast growth. However, if that person is going to have a negative Herxheimer reaction and they aren't necessarily strong enough to deal with a probiotic like that, you might want to start them with something like a True Bifido, which is a downregulating probiotic that focuses on supporting the colon, and it helps to secrete anti-inflammatory cytokines and repopulate bifidobacteria, which really do regulate much of the microbiome. And as a result of helping to build up their reserves of energy and hopefully reducing the burden on the immune system, they might therefore be ready to try something like a True Flora afterwards. So from a perspective of stool testing, I would look for any inflammatory signs in a stool test. And then from a perspective of a blood panel, I would look at the traditional, HSCRP, C-reactive protein, any kind of elevated liver enzymes. When I see someone super inflamed, I try to get the inflammation under control before I go trying to intervene dealing with anti-organismic activity, if that makes sense. Is that an okay answer, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think it's a fabulous answer. So now we have
Okay.
another one.
Okay, go for it.
When would you recommend plant enzymes versus enzymes with HCl?
Ooh, okay. So we only have either an enzyme formula that's isolated or we have an HCl by itself. We don't combine them for the very reason as this question is posed. Sometimes the combination formulas are too much for people. The plant enzymes are what I would always start with, unless you know for some reason that there's an upper GI stomach HCl dysfunction or downregulation of secretion. If someone has an ulcer or an H. pylori infection or anything that you can assume has a thin mucosal layer in the stomach, I would be very tentative with HCl because if there is an ulcer or an open wound in the stomach, HCl typically does not play well. Sometimes people can have what seems like an overabundance of acid, and this is a weird clinical thing I've seen. A person should have an under secretion of stomach acid, but they take an HCl and it burns. That's usually when there's an indicator if there's exposed tissue there. I always start with an enzyme and I want to see how the person responds. Does it improve their digestive abilities? Does it yield a change in how they feel after a meal? Does it have an effect on their bowels? And do those effects push the person in a better direction? If you can combine both of them, or you can do it specifically based upon the kind of food selection, because we know in the upper GI, HCl's job is to denature protein. So if you denature protein at a high protein meal, that might be where HCl will shine. If someone is eating more of a plant-based meal, or you know that their issues are further down in the small intestine, that's when I would start with an enzyme. And we have two different enzyme formulas. We have one that focuses more on higher protein and higher carb support. That's our Digeszyme and our Digeszyme Plus. And then we have one that's called Enzylase that uses the deep delivery technology with a higher lipase formula, which is much better for people who are struggling with high fat foods or people who are more on a lower carb, high fat diet, and especially those who have had gallbladderectomies. We don't have an ox bile formula, so if you find success with that, you might want to pair that with an Enzylase, for example, if someone is needing more support in that way.
Can someone become dependent on digestive enzymes? That's another question.
It's a great question. I don't have a direct answer. I don't believe it's possible because the body will always up or down regulate its secretion needs based upon what you're eating. But this is the thing that I think is really important with this. If the pancreas is out of energy, if any organ is out of energy, it can only do so much. So I think when people are necessitating a digestive enzyme, it's either an organ problem, i.e., it's stomach problem not making enough hydrochloric acid to trigger the release of enzymes in the pancreas. It's a pancreatic problem and they're not secreting enough enzymes, or it's a gut barrier issue because the last step of digestion is requiring brush border enzymes to be released. So it could be from a perspective of an organ problem, those three things in some specific order. But most oftentimes I see digestive dysfunction accompanied with dysautonomia, which is my clinical specialty. Because if someone has zero vagal tone, vagus nerve is the one that's going to communicate from the brain to the organs to allow secretions to happen under the right conditions of eating a meal. So I don't think someone can be dependent on an enzyme to the detriment of their own production. I think their physiology can be compromised to the point that they need an enzyme until you figure out what the problem is that's downregulating their ability to digest food.
Well, how do you differentiate between clients who need enzymatic support versus microbiome modulation first?
Ooh. So I believe pancreatic elastase is a good marker to use from an objectivity perspective when you're doing some deeper advanced testing. I think Genova GIFX and some of the other stool tests like a GI map, they have a marker for pancreatic elastase. They also have markers of protein and fats present in the stool. So you can associate based upon, is it a digestive problem looking at the objective data, or is it more of a potential microbe issue because you have overgrowths of certain strains or species that may not necessarily be at optimal levels? Or do you have bacterial overgrowth in the presence of parasitic overgrowth in the presence of yeast and fungus? So if it's an organism problem, I still treat digestion first because the terrain is affected by the inability to digest. The lack of breaking your food down essentially shuttles a buffet into the small and large intestine. And bacteria have enzymes that can actually break down proteins and carbs. And I believe that's a huge driver of dysbiosis is people not breaking down their food. So that's why I've created the master philosophy in this way. I address digestion first and I see, does that induce a change that is what I'm wanting, hoping, expecting, yes or no? If I get the yes, then I focus on that and see how far that takes me. If I get the no, then I'm going to intervene with some microbiome modulation. And I have to ask myself, is the person ready for some cleansing action? Maybe that's too aggressive. So maybe I'll start with a weaker probiotic. And I say weaker not from a perspective of dosing and potency. I say weaker from an immune stimulation perspective, because you can't supplement a probiotic in the body without the immune system having some degree of interaction and influence from the probiotic that's coming in. So that's when I'll start to layer in some other strategies. And then we can get into the systemic enzymes or breaking up biofilms and some of those other things if the person is in need of something like that.
Okay. Well, I have a couple questions here, but I feel like I should let you at least get through one or two more slides before I
Yeah.
ask you.
Well, this is a poetic slide here, right? Because this is the manifestation of what people are suffering with are the questions that are coming through that are thrown at the clinicians, I feel, right? Because nowadays, I just had a client here yesterday and I did some work with him, and he's got sciatica, but I have a few different diagnostics that I determined, like he's got some serious nervous system and gut stuff going on. So his sciatic pain left, and now I've had, what do you think about this today? What do you think about this? Should I have this coffee? Should I put this in my, we have these 10-second sound bites that are giving people, oh, here's the protocol to solve your problems. And they try these things and they unfortunately don't work. It's because the nature of clinical practice is a mixture of an art and a science, in my opinion. And the master philosophy evolved from me contemplating the framework. Like, what is it really that determines health and life? And in my world, it's cellular energetics on a physical level. And what I mean by energy, I don't mean an energy drink. I don't mean something like a mitochondrial support formula or a B vitamin. I mean, does the body make enough ATP and energy to heal itself? Because I love Dr. Zach Bush. I think he is a health practitioner and a philosopher. Maybe he's a philosopher first and a practitioner second nowadays. But this statement he made just has sat with me for so many years. When our rate of injury overwhelms our rate of repair, we start to manifest chronic disease. Said differently, when we hurt ourselves and we're unable to repair ourselves, the body gets sick. And this is how I explain things to practitioners and also other people. Physiology being dysfunctional starts with an imbalance. And you can't feel an imbalance unless you're super tuned into your body. Some people, I'm sure, can. But that imbalance may show up on a test. Someone's like, oh, I feel fine. Like, oh, you have high fasting blood sugar. Did you know that? No, your triglycerides are a little high. This looks a little off. And if you don't deal with the imbalance, eventually the imbalance generates what's called a manifestation of a symptom. And to me, the symptom is the body starting to tell you something's wrong. And I find females are good at noticing symptoms. Men are terrible because they just keep going with life because I don't have time for things that I have to deal with or feel that take me off of my path. But symptoms are the body telling you something in the physiology isn't right. But a symptom, when unaddressed over the long haul, eventually becomes a pathological pattern. And a pathological pattern usually results in someone going to a doctor's office and they play the game of whack-a-mole with medications and trying different things, maybe hopping from practitioner to practitioner. And until you get at the root cause, a pathological pattern can actually develop. And when the body runs out of compensation to suppress that pathological pattern, that's when illness manifests. And I say illness and disease are not the same thing. Dis-ease is the body out of a state of being at ease with itself, physiologically speaking. Dis-ease creates illness, and illness is actually when you're running alternative programs and your health and vitality are starting to slip away. So this is the foundational understanding of what kind of went into this. This is, in my opinion, the best way to look at the human from the micro to the macro. So the organism is what shows up in your office, and the organism is a combination of the different organ systems, and each organ system is interconnected with each other and itself in some way. In Chinese medicine, they have the meridian systems. You can understand that toxicity in the gut's going to burden the liver, which is going to compromise the kidneys, which is going to stress out the skin, because everything's interconnected. So you have to know how the organs work in order to understand the organ systems. And organs are really a combination of specialized tissues, which are really just a fundamental eukaryotic cell. And it's the organelles inside the cell that really determine how healthy someone is. So you have disturbances at the level of the organelle or the cell, but the symptoms show up in the person. And as a result of us doing deeper analysis, objectively, when we're looking at labs, we can see evidence of cellular activity when you run a Nutra-Eval or an organic acids test. You're looking at what's going on from a metabolite perspective that we can assess and analyze and maybe get deeper insights as to what the challenge someone is dealing with. Or we can do some more testing at a higher level. We can look at organ testing and understand if liver enzymes are elevated, or we can get a sense of the digestive system and how it's performing. But you don't experience changes at those levels that people can actually, latch onto. We experience symptoms and manifest observable changes at the organism level. So we have to know this stuff. Energy status here will determine the outcome of a disease here. So fundamentally, I'm always trying to figure out how can we make the cells in the body as healthy as possible. And we have to know how to do that from a microscopic perspective and eventually translate that into talking to the person who's in your office that day and understand why you're giving them certain supplements and why you're making lifestyle and diet changes, because it's the sum total of all those things that are happening on a cellular level that have created the disease or the disturbance or the imbalance that's brought them into your office.
And Roland,
So
this may be a good time to ask this question. Can you elucidate on the effect of elevated cortisol on the mucosal layer?
yes, there's a very strong relationship there. So fundamentally, over time, high levels of cortisol will downregulate the production and the thickness of the mucosal layer, because cortisol is a very energy dependent molecule that the body secretes. And when someone is producing a lot of cortisol, they're in a chronic state of fight or flight. So it's a sympathetically dominant state. So the analogy I'll use is you're spending resources, but you're not making a lot of money. And over time, you're going to go broke. What happens with high levels of cortisol is not only does it involve a downregulation of mucosal production, high levels of cortisol also induce a change in the terrain of the microbiome and therefore a change in the ecology of the gut. And when certain species are in balance, they help to prevent the microbial destruction of the mucosal layer. Under conditions of high cortisol, you typically see a downregulation in the diversity of microbes present in the gut. And because you're not digesting food and necessarily feeding the body adequate amount of fibers and substrates, the overgrown microbes start turning to the mucosal layer as a source of fuel. And when the mucosal layer breaks down, the bacteria become too close in proximity to the epithelial layer. And when that happens, it's like two neighbors who don't like each other, but they don't have a fence between their backyards. There's likely going to be a fight. So when the microbes are getting too close to the epithelial layer, it has to invoke the immune system to interact. And the immune system tries to kill off excessive amounts of microbes. But unfortunately, there's trillions upon trillions, and it can't possibly do the job. And that's usually the initiation to how high levels of cortisol create the manifestation of leaky gut and immune activation within the digestive system.
Great answer.
Great question. And then there's this aspect, and I think this will resonate with people who have a very holistic mindset. This part here is very scientific. This is looking at functional labs, this is looking at blood labs, it's assessing symptoms, and you have to translate this from your client thought process from your clinician thought process into client speak. Because clients don't want to know 5-methylmalonic acids relationship to vitamin B12 and blah, blah, blah. They want to know, oh, you have a deficiency, you have an excess. Well, are you going to do something to help me? Well, yes, I am, but what else is going on with you? And, I always start with physical health, because the average person came into your office feeling physically terrible, but I've never seen a physical problem that doesn't also require some support on a psychological and emotional and if not spiritual level. People who have serious digestive issues typically have some sort of PTSD or psycho-emotional stress that they're dealing with. And it's so cool that when you get the gut balanced out, people who've suffered with years of digestive issues and things like anxiety, OCD, behavioral disturbances, all of a sudden all that can go quiet. And then you're changing their life, not just in a physical sense, but you're really changing the holistic worldview of how this person interfaces with their reality. And I find when you open up the opportunities in the physical world, people become more open to dive into deeper work. And that's how we really get people healthy, in my opinion. So, the 3 factors for consideration of the master philosophy and its creation, just to sum everything up, basically. You have to understand the nature and the important relationships within the physiology. So, as a practitioner, this is the question I'm always asking. How does the interconnected relationship of all body systems work to maintain optimal health, and what compromises it, or what variables potentially can compromise it? To know this, you have to understand the deeper biochemistry of how health is maintained. That question about how does cortisol affect the mucosal layer is a great example of cause and effect association, of being able to potentially put the pieces together and reverse engineer a client's problem and turn that into a product selection or a lifestyle or modification or a diet adjustment. Because you have to know what the key markers and symptoms that are able to be analyzed through the macro, the person, but you got to go into the micro sometimes to understand all the pieces and how it comes together. And the third thing is just factoring in the person, personality, what they bring to the table, what they're ready for, what their economic situation is like, what their ability to adopt new lifestyle habits is like. As I said in the beginning, a plan not executed is unfortunately a waste of that person's time and money, and yours as well as the practitioner. So that's the master philosophy's why. That's the background of what it is that has gone into the process of how I've designed this. Does anyone have any questions about that that relate to that, or anything that we've spoken about up until now?
Well, we do have a question in the Q&A box. It is regarding what is your opinion of GLPs for weight loss and peptides for inflammation?
Oh, okay. So if I can, I'm going to give my personal opinion. This is not the company opinion. I'm going to speak as a clinician. I think peptides have some valuable information behind them, although I do think that they are relatively new. So there's probably a lot more going on that we've elucidated, but I've seen some success for gut inflammation with things like BPC 157. But I myself am not super into peptides. For some reason, I just have this little pause with them because anything that's super new, I don't want to rush into the deep end of the swimming pool before I know what's in the water below me. If that makes sense. As far as GLP-1 injections, overall, I'm not a fan because I think that when it comes to physiology, anything quick has its collateral damages and its costs. I think that if someone is coming into your office and they have struggled for years and they're almost out of will and they're almost out of patience for something that they've not been able to achieve, I think it can be a great starting point. But really supporting the digestive system, really supporting the muscular system, and making sure that whatever downstream consequences that that individual experiences as a result of the injections that might not be good for their health are as supported, or you can offset them as much as possible. Because again, with a new thing that people are doing, we find things out 10, 15, 20 years down the line that we can only know after time has gone by. So I hope that is a sufficient answer.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so the master philosophy itself, what is it? It's simply a guide. It's how do you navigate product selection? How do you navigate knowing what product may fit into what category? And how do you start to get to know them, not only to know what to reach for, but also to create your own protocol? Because I love protocol creation. I think protocol creation is the most beautiful blend of art and science in our profession, because being a clinician is not a left-brained endeavor. I think there's a ton of art that goes into understanding working with the body, how to pair products with body symptoms and root cause aspects, because really that's what you're doing. You're not trying to strong arm the body into doing what you want it to do. You're trying to clear the blockage. You're trying to remove the stresses so the body can express the health and vitality that it only knows how to express. And this is the other aspect. Practitioners are busy. You guys are super busy people. I know practitioners who see 8 to 12 cases a day. I don't know when there's time to study. So this is a starting point to help you fast track without telling you how to practice. Second thing is people want results. Someone suffering is not a patient person. And if they've been to other practitioners and you're the next person on their list, I'm hoping that you're the last person on their list, because you can help them by showing them that you can affect change in a way that no one ever has before. The third thing, as I mentioned before, our products are very powerful, and they're powerful on whatever level you look, on a biochemical level, based upon the science of how we deliver things into the body. That's totally unique, and people have noticed the difference. We have amazing 5-star glowing reviews. And if you're more on the bioenergetic side of things and you do muscle testing, applied kinesiology, bioenergetic acupuncture testing. These products are an absolute yes or an absolute no. So it's a wonderful thing. And the third thing is, which is not on the slides, but I'll mention, we have money back guarantees. If something doesn't work for someone, we give 100% money back because we're that confident in what it is we have and what we do. But practitioners have to add their own magic. Protocol creation is your thing. You have to use your expertise, your worldview, your specialty, your interest. And sometimes you have to add products that we don't make, because I did mention we do probiotics and we do enzymes. We do it better than anyone else, in my opinion. But there's a lot that we don't make. So I always say, figure out what your corollary or your additional product lines are that very much complement ours, because I do that myself, so I can have a much more wide variety of things to offer people. So this is the essence of the master philosophy. You have to understand the clinical issue and the driving factors. And I always start with digestion, because the digestive system seems to be the one area of the body that, even if it's not someone's main problem, it seems to help things. Someone complains about joint pain, fix their gut, all of a sudden the joint pain gets better. Someone complains about brain fog or a migraine. Tiffany mentioned a migraine. Sometimes you have to support the digestive system. It may not be that simple, which means you may need to move on. But if it's that simple, I call those easy wins and maybe no need for further clinical intervention at this moment in time. That's phase 1A. Phase 1B is when you start to look at microbiome support. So you're going to reassess, maybe you're going to do some deeper testing, and you're going to do either some microbial support from a supplementation perspective, or you're going to do some microbial support from potentially a cleansing perspective. That might be in conjunction with supporting the digestive system. That might give you your outcome. That doesn't work. You move on to more systemic support, either from a general sense, and i.e. what general means is product that has a global effect on the body through how it can influence energy levels, inflammatory status, immune activation, or you can do something that's called targeted support, because we have certain enzymes that work in very specific body areas. And this is essentially the product portfolio as it's laid out in phase 1A, 1B, which is the digestive phase. Step 2 is the systemic support. Most of these products support things like immune activation, oxidative stress, support for detoxification. And then step 3 is our targeted support. So you have enzymes that work on very specific body areas, like I mentioned. You have enzymes for the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system. You have things that are neurologically active or calming. You have things that support the detoxification pathways of the kidneys. This is how I've laid it out as a general guide. You do not need to follow this as a 1, 2, 3, 4-step process, but it's a place to start when you don't know where to start, or if you don't necessarily have familiarity with the products yet. It gets you into understanding how it is we lay our things out, because every company has their approach. We're a company. We're not dealing with your clients. We don't know the details of what it is that your clients are dealing with. So this is our way of offering a starting point.
Roland,
And
we do
there's
have a question.
Sure, please.
How do you prevent overloading detox pathways when introducing systemic protocols?
Ooh, how do I prevent overloading? Well, the first thing that I always go back to is my biological medicine training, which is you have to open all channels of detox. So if the person's not breathing well, if they're not moving their body, i.e., they're not moving fluids, not only circulatory fluids, but interstitial fluids through the matrix, they're not sweating at some point, they don't have frequent bowel movements, and they're not urinating to the point where you think they're adequately hydrated, I don't even begin detox until we get those things underway. If I want to do detox, I always start gently. So I'm not someone who likes to throw hellfire and brimstone into someone. I test things. So I will test most stressed organ. I will also test detoxification pathways to figure out what that person's ready for. And if they're not ready for detox, I don't detox the person until I build them up a little bit more. So I would say very carefully, the best way to start detox is getting the fundamental lifestyle aspects in order. The second best way to support detox is making sure the person's getting adequate amino acid support, because all of your phase 2 liver detoxification enzymes are amino acid dependent patterns or pathways when it comes to chelation. And then you have to figure out what is it you're trying to detoxify, and how are you going to support that. So I wish I could give a more specific answer, but I don't know what we're trying to detoxify. So I always go back to, what are the conditions under which you want to detoxify someone? Are they all being met? then you have to try and you have to gauge the response. Is the person able to tolerate what you're doing? Or are you getting a Herxheimer's reaction? You have to back off because the intention was too aggressive.
Well, the next question we have here is, do you think colonics and coffee enemas are good for cleaning and detoxing the colon?
Yes, and yes. I have explored both of them myself. I have had clients do them. I do believe that they are very useful tools. I'm of the mind to say that gut toxicity is such a powerful driver of so many body systems being compromised and dysregulated because if the gut is toxic, to me, it's like a New York sewer. If anyone can envision like the disgusting cesspool of a New York sewer. And if that's going to start leaking into the waterways of where people's water systems are going to come into the house, what's going to be the quality of the liquid flowing into the house? That is how I look at what happens in the gut as it affects the circulatory system, cardiovascular system, and the lymphatic system. If the gut is chronically toxic and the gut is likely leaky when the gut is toxic, not only are you going to have an upregulation of immune activity locally within the gut and peripherally within the circulatory systems, you're going to have a greater stress being placed upon the detoxification pathways. And over time, that's going to downregulate systemic energy production because we know that higher levels of bioaccumulated toxins that get into circulatory nature will go to all the different tissues and organs. And over time, from a perspective of delivering nutrition and removing waste material, one gets worse, that's the delivery of nutrition, and the removal of waste, so other way around, that gets worse, and the delivery is downregulated. So you accumulate waste in the cells, and ultimately, a lot of that, I believe, is stemming from the bowel and the excessive amount of toxicity that the average person is carrying around in their bowels nowadays. I think the average transit time for a female is somewhere between 36 and 72 hours. So where is that waste material going when it's sitting there? There's a lot of reabsorption. And over time, that's going to change the makeup of the ecology of the gut. You're going to have bacterial overgrowth. You're going to have archaea overgrowth, mycoplasma overgrowth. And then that's just going to create a further downregulation of health through increased toxicity. So I do think cleaning out the bowel via colonics and or coffee enemas are useful. Coffee enemas seem to help liver pathway detoxification. Again, it's anecdotal. I've not found any true research behind this, but I can elaborate from my own experience. I noticed a dramatic difference when I've done coffee enemas for a period of time. I just don't think one should become dependent upon those because part of your parasympathetic nervous system that regulates bowel function can be negatively influenced if someone is always doing an enema, and they might lose the ability to regulate muscle contraction and peristalsis to release waste on their own. So I think that there's point of balance that's really important when it comes to those tools. But if someone is seriously toxic, seriously constipated, has a hard time relieving their bowels, those are probably some of the greatest tools to use in conjunction with digestive support, dietary changes, and of course, teaching them how to access their rest and digest nervous system, parasympathetic activity.
Thank you.
No problem. I'll go through these a little quicker because everyone's going to get these slides, so it's not like you have to commit this all to memory. But the rationale behind the master philosophy is quite simple. Poor digestive function, literally, as I just mentioned, can be a major driver of downstream issues, and it's usually the four following areas that seem to be the biggest problematic issues. Inadequate breakdown of nutrition, so you're going to have nutritional inadequacies as a result of not properly breaking down the macro and micronutrients that you're eating. Downregulation of digestive secretions. In addition to compromising inadequate breakdown, things like bile act as a way to clean your small intestine. Secondary bile acids are a way to promote microbial diversity in the colon. Hydrochloric acid kills things. So you want to make sure that if you're in a part of the world where you're eating food that you're not used to, your immune system is probably not adequately prepared for the microbes and the interaction of the microbes. They're going to come in off of the food that you're eating. So making sure that you don't have downregulated digestive secretions is incredibly important for keeping things from coming into the system. Then there's the absorptive aspects. So the inability to absorb nutrition based upon the fact that you're not breaking it down. And the long-term microbiome consequences are you're providing a buffet for the bacteria living in the small and large intestine. So what you don't break down, they will, and it will cause an overgrowth to happen. And these are the very specific consequences that typically happen. So changes to the ecology of the microbiome, you have disruption of the gut immune connection, the immune system becomes hypervigilant, you increase your likelihood for overgrowths, infestations and infections, and overall you're going to experience a change of the terrain or the landscape in your gut and the development of dysbiosis, leaky gut, and the systemic influences, which are the downstream consequences. And this is why everyone should know process of digestion, understand the organs involved, what their role and their participation is, and how to potentially assess symptoms as it may relate to an organ that is not contributing properly. And process of digestion in the small intestine is also very, very intimately connected to the immune system. So when there's nutritional inadequacies, high amounts of overgrowth in the form of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, or there's another one called SIFO, not only are you going to compromise your ability to absorb nutrition, you're going to promote overgrowths of things that are going to cause immune system issues and chronic activation of the immune system, which is more and more being linked to all aspects of chronic autoimmunity and degenerational inflammatory conditions of all kinds. Then you have 1B, which is dysbiosis. And I always say dysbiosis is a thing, but it's not one thing. And I'll be the first to say, we know very little about the gut microbiome in terms of all the details of information that could be elucidated. If you really think about it, no two cases of dysbiosis are ever the same, and it can be multifactorial. I alluded to before, you can have bacterial dysbiosis, you can have fungal dysbiosis, you can have parasitic dysbiosis, you can have all of them. And that's why it's really hard for people to treat these things. You know, antibiotics are sometimes useful and necessary, but people who have had many courses of antibiotics over the course of their life typically have some of the worst dysbiosis that I see, because what overgrows and replicates after a course of antibiotics typically generates a dysbiosis. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the changes in the microbe profile from a perspective of dysbiosis. That's why stool testing can be useful. And the functional terrain, that's more about understanding the associations between how important it is to maintain the integrity of the epithelial lining, the bacteria that live in the mucosal lining, and making sure that you can support that through regular dietary strategies and probiotic supplementation. Because dysbiosis can exist in stages and it can develop based upon inputs. And I find clinically, long-standing dysbiosis will always lead to systemic immune activation of some sort. And the associated health issues that we're seeing from a gut immune axis perspective are getting stronger and stronger, being tied back to chronic immune activation from issues going on in the gut. So you have breakdown of the epithelial barrier, you have a compromisation of the GALT, which is the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, and the circulatory systems. They're going to absorb a lot of the toxicity that comes from the gut, things like endotoxins, bacterial polysaccharides, things that can leak into your circulatory system. Your immune cells are going to be on overdrive. You're going to have hypervigilance, and so you can develop immune sensitivities, food allergies, all kinds of issues as a result of the body trying to keep itself safe. And over time, the microbes and the associated residents of the gut are going to change. It's going to be like a neighborhood that has essentially developed an entirely new community. And over time, if that community becomes problematic for the body, dysbiosis will lead to systemic inflammation and immune activation. So it's really important to understand that there are patterns. Most of the bacteria in our microbiome lives in our colon. So when you're trying to affect the microbiome, the colon is the place of greatest opportunity. It's also the place of the greatest opportunity for different kinds of pathogens to overgrow. However, if you want to look at systemic issues as it relates to chronic inflammation, I find more and more people nowadays, and I'd be interested to know what you guys are experiencing. I'm seeing a lot of issues for the small intestine because we've had so many people who have had gallbladderectomies, they have chronic gallstones, they have digestive secretion dysfunctions, and they're not able to clean out the small intestine. And the small intestine is actually very fragile and has a very thin layer of mucosal distribution along the epithelial cells. So that's why we have our different products that have the ability to influence specific areas within the GI system. Probiotic for the small intestine, we have one that supposedly helps with the colon, and then we have one that has global coverage because it's a mix of lactobacillus and a mix of bifidobacterium. So on the left, you see a depiction of the microscopic environment that's optimal, right? So you have the tight junction proteins intact, so things are going to be absorbed through the epithelial cells. They're not going to fall between the gaps into the circulatory systems and the immune barrier underneath. You have an intact, thick layer of mucus. There's enough production of short chain fatty acids, and you have an optimal environment to maintain eubiosis. The average person with gut issues is experiencing what we see on the right-hand side. So you can see physiologically, you have a thin layer of mucus with an overgrowth or an abundance of bacteria. That's that crosstalk activation that I talked about. When the mucosal layer thins too much, the bacteria get in close proximity to the epithelial cells. The immune system has to intervene, and it creates an inflammatory response that downregulates the ability to maintain the tight junction integrity, so that the gap in the cells start to widen out. So things that are not meant to get into circulation, into the systems of the body that the gut's really trying to keep out, start to become problematic. So you get LPS translocation, lipopolysaccharides. I have another little fun acronym I can say off camera later is how I remember those. You get undigested food molecules. You get potential environmental compounds or things that are actually in the mucosa that are trying to be entrapped. The susceptibility is they can fall into the circulatory system. And once they're in the circulatory system, they go everywhere, because the gut, in theory, is still the outside of our body. Even though it's in the trunk of our body and our torso, it's still not inside the body because it doesn't have access to every single organ, cell, and tissue. But leaky gut compromises that. So you have a breach. And the body, when it's chronically subjected to an inflammatory insult, becomes better at raising inflammation. So you actually have this epigenetic phenomenon that upregulates the body's ability to make pro-inflammatory cytokines and to be more immune reactive. It's called the NF-kappa B pathway. And this is what I think is happening on a very general level that eventually leads to the downstream consequences that we're seeing upregulate at an alarming pace nowadays. Autoimmunity, neurodegeneration, cardiodegeneration, cancers, various other things. I can't make any claims that A plus B equals C, but I believe that there's a very intimate connection between all of these scenarios. Because you have to make sure, again, if the lumen breaks down, you lose the physical barrier. If the epithelial breaks down, you lose the chemical barrier. And now you have something that has breached an area that is actually meant to be a removal system. Like the colon is essentially your sewer system. And when you move your bowels on a regular basis, that's the body evacuating waste material. That waste material gains entry to the body, it's always going to downregulate vitality and upregulate inflammation. So we'll let you guys go through those later because I just broke those down. This is what I was talking about. And this is a very, very interesting thing to me. The gut-brain axis was one of the first ones that was introduced, and it's the bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut, usually via the vagus nerve, top down, and via the influences that the gut makes, things like signaling molecules, short-chain fatty acids, or various cytokines can actually communicate back to the brain. So there's a crosstalk going on between the body. Now we know that things like neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, there's a strong correlation of evidence showing that 10 years prior to the manifestation of those diseases, you can see some signs of dysregulation in the gut. But we're looking at all these other axes now. The gut-heart axes, very strong tie between atherosclerosis and what's going on in the digestive system. Anyone who has clients with skin issues, a skin problem is an internal problem. You can put all the topical stuff on you want until you figure out what the gut immune inflammatory process is that's driving that gut skin axis issue, you will never solve it. If you look at the world of metabolic health, people who are insulin resistant, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, mitochondrial dysfunction, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, they all have ties to microbiome dysbiosis and gut dysfunction. Same thing with the gut-lung axis. People who are chronic asthma sufferers typically have a different phenotype of their microbiome relative to people who do not suffer from said conditions. So that's why I say, regardless of what someone's dealing with, if you address the gut, everything to some degree will improve. Hopefully you can go deeper, but that's why I think starting with 1A and 1B is a really, really safe starting point for the average person, because everyone still needs to nourish themselves regardless of what it is they have to deal with. So 2 and 3 are where we go from digestive to more general systemic support. These are the 6 areas that I typically think about when it comes to pairing our products with either a condition, a manifestation of a symptom, or a pre-existing diagnosis. So you're looking at redox imbalance, that is the oxidative stress game that's being played in the body. When things are excessively oxidized, tissues start to degrade. You have mitochondrial changes. The mitochondria act as our threat sensors. There's a really, really cool paper called the cell danger response that actually goes into detail when someone is under the threat of bacterial or viral infection, chronic toxicity. Body will downregulate mitochondrial function. It will throttle back thyroid function, because if your mitochondria are making too many reactive oxygen species, that's detrimental to the body. So downregulation of energy production in my world is a strategic decision by the body to not rust itself excessively, because anytime you upregulate reactive oxygen species, you upregulate that pathway that I mentioned, which is called NF-kappa B. And over time, tissues break down, cells become weak and sick, and they give birth to weaker and sicker daughter cells. And to me, this is a very short but elegant description of what we see of long-term degeneration. Unfortunately, the standard of care nowadays for neurodegenerative disease, cardiodegenerative disease, autoimmune degenerative conditions are either you take an anti-inflammatory, or here's an immune suppressor, or here's something to suppress a symptom. What if we could address those and help the body reverse engineer the problem by downregulating the immune system in terms of its activation, not suppressing it, and helping the body reduce itself by evacuating the things that are becoming problematic, and also supporting the body from a nutritional perspective, from a system-wide support perspective. So that's why I have in phase 2, you have general systemic support. And these are our products that affect the entire body through the mechanisms of action of immune function, detoxification support, antioxidant status, nutritional support, which is vitamins and minerals, and system-wide inflammation. This is where our systemic proteolytic enzymes come in. And then we have targeted support, where you can go after those specific body systems based upon what the product does and where it works. We have products that are very much targeted to the brain and the nervous system. We have enzymes that work really well within the cardiovascular system. Nattokinase has been very popular since COVID, for example. Same with lumbar kinase. We have respiratory support for people who have chronic respiratory issues in the form of an enzyme called Enzyme. And my favorite enzyme on the planet, because it is so good in a multitude of areas, but specifically for connective tissue, is one called serrapeptidase or serratiopeptidase, and that's for musculoskeletal support. So that is a basic overview. So this is my own kind of thing to sum up why this exists. And I think this is something that I believe is really important to communicate with other professionals. Illness is not an accident or a random thing. To me, illness is a conscious adaptation by the body to try and compensate for something that it can't get a handle on. And we've talked about the path of imbalance to symptom to pathology to illness. And it's really understanding that it's a result of the body's responses to the habitual states of the physiologic input. So I tell everyone, you are the sum of all the inputs that you've ever had in your life. Any kind of disease that has actually been diagnosed has been there for years prior to its diagnosis. The diagnosis was only evident when the body could no longer suppress or silence the symptoms anymore, and they were bad enough for you to reach out and want to ask for help or to try to do something about them. So these inputs are physical in nature, they're mental, they're emotional, they're even environmental. The world we live in nowadays is not the pristine world of 150, 200 years ago. As much as people would love to, get back to a more ancestral way of living, we live in city centers. We're always surrounded by electromagnetic smog. The quality of the water we drink, the quality of the air we breathe, all of these things are compromised. So nowadays, I believe that supplements are essentially necessary to help offset the stresses that our bodies are always under. So we really have to create a starting point. The master philosophy is a starting point and a protocol guide for clinician use. It really is, again, how it can fit into your way of operating and what it is you are trying to do with your clients based upon E, your specialty, B, the kind of people you want to see, or C, the kind of practice that you want to run. So I do have a few other things that I can go through, but I know we're at the top of the hour. I'll go through them really quickly. This is the one I wanted to talk about here. The art and science of client practice. When it comes to creating a protocol, I think this is my favorite aspect to dig into. I did mention before that creating a protocol is not simply understanding what product pairs with things. It's a very Western medical view. I think if you use the philosophy that I put forth, or at least understand that what you're trying to do is support the body in trying to remove the restrictions, to try to address the imbalances and to try to get things out of the physiology that are causing the problem in the first place. I think supporting digestion and making sure that the person is adequately breaking down and absorbing the nutrition is always going to be the first step, because it's going to be what nourishes the body, and it takes energy for the body to recover. B, if the person has a chronic issue within their gut, if they have chronic issues within their microbiome that are going to be driving an immune inflammation activation process, you're never going to get that person healthy until you're able to downregulate what the threat is that's causing the inflammation, until you're able to help that person figure out how to find their microbiome in a state that is more restorative, that is more in alignment with what their unique microbiome phenotype could be in the first place. And the last thing is, if it is a systemic issue, you have to know where to intervene and how to intervene specifically. And this is why you have this 1A, 1B, 2, and 3 process, because you can pick from things strategically and then bring in what it is we don't have to support, maybe from the nutritional side of things, maybe from the detoxification side of things. So that's really what it is that I have to go through today, why it's relevant. We've gone through this. We've gone through that. And if you guys do want to connect with us more, we do have amazing professionals back at the office. So if you don't have an account and you do want to look into getting one set up, we have 2 customer service specialists, Bill and Blake. If you remember, they both have a B name. If you want to give them a call, they will be happy to help you set up an account. You can go through usenzymes.com. And when you're there, you have access to both the US Enzymes product portfolio, and you can also look at the master supplement side of things, which is the sister brand that's more on the consumer side. We do have a pretty strong presence on YouTube. So we have our monthly webinar features. This month, we're doing one on immune activation. And after each webinar, we put them up on YouTube. So you have about 5 years of past lectures that I've done and gone through. If you want to go to our channel, check out some stuff and subscribe. We are also on Instagram, Facebook, and I do host a podcast called Following Your Gut, where we get to interview amazing health professionals of all walks of life. We have interviews from functional chiros, nutritionists, medical doctors. Every so often I'll jump on and do my own episode, just kind of riffing through things that I find interesting that I want to share. So with that, guys, I will pause for any additional questions. I'll take a little sip of water. I know we went a little bit over in time, so I apologize for going over, but I really did appreciate the interaction because I love the question and answer format.
Well, we really appreciate having you here, and hopefully you can join us at HillCon. I know that US Enzymes will be at HillCon exhibiting. So if anyone out there is watching this and you're planning on joining us at HillCon, please go to their booth, have some conversations, reach out to them. And Roland, maybe we can get you to join us there so that we can ask you questions all day, every day.
When is that? When is that coming up?
It is coming up on April 30th through May 3rd.
Okay.
And it is in Bellevue, Washington.
Okay, very cool. I will definitely put that on my calendar, see if I can make it out.
Oh, we would love that.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate everyone's participation. And
it looks like we do have, well, I think you had mentioned this already, but it says, what's the specific name of your YouTube channel? Is it also Following Your Gut or no?
No, it is the US Enzymes YouTube channel.
US Enzymes YouTube channel.
Yeah, so just US Enzymes. If you punch that in on the YouTube search bar, it will take you right there.
Got it. Well, just as a reminder to everyone, this webinar will be recorded and it will be sent out later this week so that you can have access and watch it all over again. And thank you so much for joining us again, Roland. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Tiffany. And everyone, thank you so much. It was great to connect with you all.
Okay, have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
The information presented in this webinar is for educational purposes only. Please note that holistic nutrition professionals do not diagnose, prevent, treat, cure, prescribe, manage, or heal diseases or medical conditions. They are also not licensed in any state and work with clients, not patients. There are no continuing education credits associated with this webinar.